All right, this is section 8.1, circles and circumference. And so today we're moving into our geometry unit. And so we're going to start with talking about circles. And a circle is a set of all points in a plane that are the same distance from the center. And so a circle has a few different parts that we can look at. It has a radius and a diameter. And so the radius of a circle, you can see here, the radius is the part here that goes from the center of the circle to any point on the circle. So it's, I guess you could say, halfway across. It goes halfway through the circle. And the diameter goes all the way through the circle. Diameter is the distance across the circle, still goes through the center, but it goes all the way through the circle. And so one thing that we can gather from this is that the diameter is twice the radius. And we see that down here. The diameter is twice the radius. Or you could say that the radius is half of the diameter. So if the radius was 3, the diameter would be 6. And if the diameter was 12, then the radius would be 6. All right, so let's look at a couple examples. Here in circle A, we have a circle that has a diameter of 20 feet, and we are supposed to find the radius of the circle. Well, since the radius is half of the diameter, we really just need to do 20 divided by 2. And that means the radius is going to be 10 feet. Obviously, we're going to have a ton of labels in this section because everything's going to have some sort of feet or inches or meters or whatever the label is. But we don't actually need a picture of a circle to find what the radius or what the diameter is. Here in example B, it says a circle with a 16-meter diameter. Well, I don't need a picture of that. I know that the radius is always half, so 16 divided by 2 means that the diameter, or the radius, I should say, since we're finding the radius is going to be 8 meters. Now, the flip side of that is finding the diameter. If you have the radius, you can find the diameter. And since the diameter goes all the way through the circle and not just halfway, then we would just take whatever measure they give us for the radius, in this case 7, and we multiply it by 2. So the diameter of this circle is 14 meters. And in circle B, since the radius goes halfway through, we multiply by 2. And that means the diameter would be 18 yards. So again, the diameter goes all the way through the circle. So the diameter would be the distance all the way through. But the radius only goes halfway through. And so that's two important vocab words that we're going to need basically this whole chapter. Our next vocab word is circumference, and circumference is the distance around a circle. And so you can think of it as being the perimeter of a circle. The reason we don't call it the perimeter is because perimeter is only a word that we can use for polygons, and a polygon is a shape that has straight edges. So like a rectangle or a triangle or a parallelogram, we can do perimeter for those because they're straight lines. But since a circle is a curve, we don't call it perimeter. Instead, we call it the circumference. But it means the same thing. It's the distance around the shape. The ratio circumference over diameter is the same for every single circle and is represented by the Greek letter pi, which you probably have seen before. It looks like almost like a cursive R. And so pi is approximately 3.14, which you probably knew. That's what we're going to use for pi. Or the closest fraction that you can use to estimate pi is 22/7. We don't use that a whole lot, to be honest, but I just wanted to let you know that's the closest fraction. If you do 22 divided by 7, you'll get a number that's really close to pi. It's not exact, though. And really, since pi is an irrational number, we can't get an exact number for it because to be irrational means it has a never-ending amount of decimal places. So that's why we're just going to round it to 3.14. So for the next few problems, we're going to try to find the circumference of the circle. And so our circumference formula, the one that I'm going to use here is C for circumference equals pi times diameter. That's the one I'm going to use. And I'm just going to make sure we always use the diameter. There is another formula that says C equals 2 pi r. And so this formula comes from the fact that if you do the radius and times it by 2, that gives you the diameter. So really these formulas are exactly the same. I'm just going to make sure that if they give us the diameter, that's what we use. And if they give us the radius, that we multiply it by 2 so that we can have the diameter, and then we'll use that. All right, so let's look at this first question here where it says find the circumference of the circle. We're given looks like a frisbee with a radius of 5. So it's important that we know what they're giving us. And so because I know this distance goes halfway across the circle, I know that that's going to be our r, which is the radius. But the circumference formula is C equals pi times diameter. So I'm going to want to find the diameter of the circle. Remember, the diameter goes all the way through. So if I just double 5, that means the diameter will be 10. And so I just need to do pi times 10. And so pi, we're going to always use the decimal 3.14 when we do that. So we're going to do 3.14 times 10. And so if you multiply 3.14 times 10, you end up getting 31.4, because it just moves the decimal one spot to the right. 31.4, and then we're going to label inches. That's going to be our units because that's going to be the distance around that frisbee. So that was really easy to do. We just had to multiply the radius by 2 to find the diameter, which was 10, and we just times it by pi. In example B, we can do the same thing, except this time they've already given us the diameter. You can see this red line goes all the way through the circle for this little watch here. And it says that the diameter is 28 millimeters. So since circumference is pi times diameter, and they already are giving us the diameter, I just need to do pi times 28. Which, of course, pi is 3.14, so I'm just doing 3.14 times 28. And that's going to give us 87.92, and that will be measured in millimeters. So that would be the circumference of our watch. Now, I wanted to show you something. Since our diameter here is a multiple of 7, I could actually use the fraction 22/7 for pi, and that might actually be a little bit easier here. So if I do pi 22/7 times diameter, which was 28, or 28 over 1, the reason I can use 28 over 7 is because being a multiple of 7, 28 will cancel with 7. And so 7 goes into 28 4 times. And then so I really just do 22 times 4, which is 88. And you can see how close our answer of 88 millimeters is to our answer of 87.92 millimeters that we got down here. So big ideas might even tell you, use 22 over 7 for pi because you get a better answer. One more thing I would like to say about pi is that many of you with your scientific calculators have a pi button. And so feel free to use that pi button anytime you're using pi. Now, I will say that it will make your answer a little bit different from the rest of us who use 3.14 for pi, because if you use your pi button, it's got a ton more digits because pi has an infinite amount of digits. So your calculator is able to fit more. So it will change your answer slightly, but big ideas will accept both answers. So you can use the pi button for those of you that have that on your calculator. Sometimes you'll see a problem that wants you to write your answer in terms of pi. And so you might even see that on the iLearn test. You write your answer in terms of pi. And so what that means is to simplify the expression without multiplying by pi. Now, if you're like me, you're thinking, well, hold up a second. The whole problem says we're supposed to multiply the diameter by pi. And that's going to make this a super easy problem then. Because let's look at this pool, for example, the diameter of this pool, because it's going to go all the way across, so that's our diameter. The diameter is 14, so I say, well, circumference equals pi times 14. And that right there is in terms of pi. That's it. So the reason that they would want you to do this is because it's actually more accurate to write your answer in terms of pi because you haven't rounded pi to a decimal, 3.14. but it's not as useful. I mean, if I said, hey, I'm going to walk around my pool and I'm going to walk 14 pi feet. Well, no one really knows how far that is until you actually approximate it by multiplying by 3.14. So if we do 14 times 3.14, we find out that the circumference of this pool is 43.96 feet. So again, in terms of pi, it just means write everything you can without multiplying it by pi. And so you might see that. We'll actually use that in the next chapter as well, and it'll be more useful to us in the next chapter to write your answer in terms of pi. For example, D, we have, it looks like a coin, a car wash coin here. Almost said it was a nickel, but it's not technically a nickel here. And it says in terms of pi. So this time they give us the radius. And so the radius only goes halfway through, and so our circumference formula wants us to use the diameter. So the diameter of this coin would be 2 times 2, which is 4. And so we're going to use circumference equals pi times diameter, and then so 4 pi, or 4 pi centimeters, would be actually our measure in terms of pi. And if we go ahead and multiply 4 by our approximate version of pi, which is 3.14, 4 times 3.14 is going to give us 12.56 centimeters. And so the approximate version of pi is more useful when you're wanting an estimate of how long that distance is, whereas the terms of pi is useful if you just want the exact answer. This next example looks pretty interesting. It says, find the circumference of both circles and label. So let's start with maybe the inside circle. The circumference formula is C equals pi d, which is pi times diameter. And they're going to give us the diameter here is 9. So I'm just going to do pi times 9, and I'll have my answer. And I'm going to go ahead and use the approximate version and go ahead and just multiply by 3.14. And 9 times 3.14 is going to give us 28.26 feet. So that's the circumference of the purple circle, and honestly, that's probably the easier one. And then now we get to this golden circle on the outside. We want to know the distance around this golden circle, going all the way around it here. So how are we going to do that when they only give us a small chunk of the circle? Well, imagine if I could rotate the purple circle a little bit to line up those red lines. I know it's 9 feet across the purple circle, so that's going to be 9. I know this chunk is 2.5, which also means that chunk up there is going to be 2.5. And so 2.5 and 2.5 is 5 if you add them together. And if you add that with the 9 that we have here in the middle, 5 and 9 makes 14. So the diameter, if I just could draw one straight line across here, the diameter of this entire golden circle is 14, and that's what I'm going to use then. So C equals pi times diameter. That means pi times 14. And that's going to give us 43.96. Remember, I'm just multiplying 14 by pi, which is 3.14. And so that's how I find. That was a little bit trickier because it takes a little bit of critical thinking to see what the diameter of that golden circle is. All right, next let's talk about a semicircle. A semicircle is half of a regular full circle. Now, when I find the perimeter of a semicircle, I'm only going to be using half of the circumference formula because I'm only going to go halfway around the circle like you see me doing right here. However, because the center of the circle is now exposed, meaning it's on the outside now, because in a regular circle, we just worry about finding the distance around it. We don't have to go across it. But since it's on the outside now, we are going to have to add this dimension back in. And by the way, that dimension I just highlighted red is the diameter of the circle, and they're giving us that to be 6 meters. So if I want to find half of the circumference, I just find the full circumference and divide it by 2. So I'm going to do, instead of pi times d, I'm going to do 1/2 of pi times d. And so that means half of pi times 6, because the diameter is 6. Now, I can do multiplication in any order I want to, so I'm just going to do half of 6 first. Half of 6 we know is 3, so this means 3 times pi. And 3 times pi is going to give us 28.26. Now, that's the distance of the purple distance I've got there. So I'm going to highlight this in purple because that's the purple distance I've got. I still need to add on this red right here because I haven't done that yet. And so that's just 6. So I'm going to add, when I get the 28.26, I'm just going to add 6 to that. And that's going to give me 34.26 meters. And that would be my final answer, 34.26 meters. So let's try that again on this example, and maybe if that last one didn't make as much sense, maybe this one will make a little bit more sense. I want to find the distance all the way around the semicircle, so I'm going to start by using the circumference formula to find out what this distance is. But of course, that's not the full circumference, that's only half the circumference. So I'm going to do half times pi times diameter. Now this time, the circle is only giving us the radius, which is 15. So if I double that and want the diameter is actually going to be 30 then. So that's what I'm going to use for D. So 1/2 times pi times 30. Well, half of 30 is 15, so I can immediately just say I'm just going to do 15 times pi, and that's going to be 47.1. But again, that's only going to give me this distance here, that it goes around the circle, but not the distance across the circle. I know the distance across the circle is 30 inches. So I'm going to add 30 inches onto that, and that's going to give me a final answer of, scroll down a little bit, 77.1 inches. So basically, I have 2 steps for these problems. I have to find half of the circumference. That's step 1. Find what half of the circumference is. And then step 2, add the diameter back on so we can get that straight across distance. And so there's 2 sides to our semicircle. Whereas a regular circle only has 1 curved edge that we have to find, a semicircle is going to have 1 and 2. So I have to add 2 sides, half the circumference and then the straight diameter side. So I just add them together. So over here on the right side, step 1 was find half the circumference. And then step 2, add the diameter back on to get your total perimeter of that semicircle. Our last problem here is actually going to have us solve for the diameter given the circumference. It says the circumference of a roll of caution tape decreases 10.5 inches after a construction worker uses some of the tape. What is the diameter of the roll after this decrease? So we know that the circumference right now is 31.4 inches. And then it says they're going to decrease the circumference. See, it's decreasing here by 10.5 inches. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're just going to subtract, we're going to subtract 10.5 inches from 31.4 inches. And that's going to give us a new circumference of 20.9 inches. And then it wants us to find the diameter of the roll of caution tape now that it's 20.9 inches. So my circumference formula is C equals pi times D. And normally I would plug in for D here, multiply by pi, and find circumference. Well, I'm working backwards here. I'm actually going to take this 20.9, since that's the circumference, and I'm going to plug it in for C. So 20.9 equals pi times D. And if normally I would multiply the diameter by pi to find the circumference, here I'm going to divide the circumference by pi so I can find the diameter. Now remember, pi is a number. Pi is 3.14. It's not a variable. That can be confusing at times. It's a number. So I'm just going to divide, and when you divide 20.9 by 3.14, you get this really, really long decimal. And so I'm going to round it to one decimal place here. So I see 6.65, and so that would round to making our diameter, making our diameter 6.7, and that's going to be measured in inches. So our diameter would be 6.7 inches.